I think we might as well kick off now, actually, because it's now 6 minutes into the official start of the meeting. So can I welcoming everyone. We have a couple of new members as well. I know Caroline's here. I'm not sure whether some of our other people are new members or visitors, but everybody is welcome. Purpose of the meeting, of course, tonight is to kick off the Ivy Ferrari Cup, and we welcome our speaker, Sarah Passingham. First of all, I just apologise for the continued use of Zoom. I think I've sent an email around to everyone to say that the church authorities have stated that they are not opening the church hall for the foreseeable future. And therefore, we will be continuing to use Zoom for most of our meetings. I know that Kathy will be running a couple of workshops. I'm not sure, Kathy, whether you've actually decided what format that will take.
Well, it depends. I've got both options open because I think one of my workshops is sort of later on next year. I think there's one in April. But I'm basically preparing for either situation, really.
Okay. Right, if we just, there's no point doing the usual, here are the emergency exits. Can we then move on to good news? Has anybody got any good news?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Yes. I'm giving a talk in Peter Mancroft tomorrow as part of the Heritage weekend thing, the open days. First live talk in front of proper faces, be it with masks on, for 6 months. Honoured to be asked. The two this week that have already been on are people with PhDs and all sorts. So I feel a bit of a fraud, but I'll get in there tomorrow with my slides about the Lady Lord Mayors of Norwich. And even if there isn't an audience, they film it, they do it out in YouTube live stream, and then that video stays on YouTube for some time. So how exciting is that?
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, no, there's a link for the website straight away, Kathy.
Okay, I'll send you the link tonight.
Yeah. Anyone else get any good news? Oh, deathly quiet. Oh dear. Sorry. Right. Okay. A bit of good news for congratulations to the circle as a whole. Some of you may remember that in the good old days when we used to meet together, we held a workshop to do some character development for a murder mystery game for Black Shuck Gin. Now, some of us then sort of went on to participate in a run-through of the initial game, which highlighted a number of prop issues. But subsequently now, we've reached the point where Black Shuck are now happy with the content of the game, the structure, etc., etc. And they've assured me that they will soon be putting the game into production. With a credit to Norwich Writers Circle.
Yay!
Yeah, I think the only rather unusual request that they made was that, and Philip will be aware of this because she was part of the test team, if you like. But we actually, it's all very 20s, rolling 20s, public school, etc. We use the word fag to refer to somebody who was bullied at school. And Black Shuck's own test team were very unhappy with the use of the word fag.
Oh.
I've had to remove it.
Okay.
I think I left it in with a kind of, this is what they used to call it in the 1920s kind of thing. But the good news is that we are going at the murder mystery game. Oh, Christy's here. Well, the murder mystery game is going into production. I don't know when it will be because obviously they're quite busy people. But we shall look forward to that, and hopefully they will. I've asked them to send us a couple of copies, so hopefully that may well prove to be a raffle prize in the glorious future to come.
Christmas presents.
Yes. The other I've got a bit of somewhat good news, in as much that I don't know if anybody remember, Jill sent this one around originally, a request by Sewell Theatre to give them some 10-minute plays. And I messed about with one of my short stories and converted it to a play, and it was actually performed as part of a 2-night series not involving the actors. And one of the guys who was, well, the play that I did had 2 people in it, a man and a woman. And the guy who played the man was actually a professor of creative literature at UEA. And he was very lavish in his praise for what I'd written. So hopefully that may well be redone in a different format. It was done over Zoom. That's something to look forward to.
Good.
Yeah. Right, so, Christy, welcome. Can you hear me?
Hi Ian, yeah I can. Hi, thanks. I'm on my phone, so I've not got the camera up because we're having trouble with the internet at the moment. But yeah, thanks for welcoming me. I'm hoping to get involved.
Well, thank you very much, Christy. Yeah, it's welcome. It's Chris, for everyone else, Chris is one of our new members. I think you entered the Olga Sinclair this year, so...
I did, yeah, that's right. Sorry?
Welcome to the Norwich Writers Circle.
Thank you.
I think we've now moved to the main person of the evening, and that's to welcome Sarah, who's going to be our adjudicator for the Ivy Ferrari Cup. I think, Sarah, would it be right to call it a family memoir, Push, My Father, Polio and Me?
Absolutely perfect, yes.
I mean, that was listed in Jarrell's top 10 reads of 2019. And Sarah is multi-talented, not only writing successful short stories, but also poetry, and you've even written the lyrics for an oratorio, which I have to confess, I didn't know what an oratorio was until this evening, so you actually helped my education. Could you just give us a very brief insight into your own work, and then let us know what kind of things you're looking for with regard to the entries for the Ivy Ferrari Cup?
Yes, thank you very much for asking me. Well, thank you, Phillida, because I think after the East Anglian Book Awards last year, you came up to me, Phillida, and asked me, because I gave a speech there. And I just wanted to say that it's so strange after what's happened, because I asked everybody to do a sort of thought experiment about imagining they were being isolated away from family and friends and all that, and it's quite horrible what has happened, you know, for real. Anyway, the book that I've written, which is this, is about a virus and how it affected my family, about polio. But briefly, you want to know a little bit about my writing history, do you?
Yes, by all means.
So I did not read English at university. I'm a graphic designer, actually, by trade, by education. And I've got a degree in graphics, and I worked in the design industry. And I started writing because, well, I found that there were a lot of incredibly talented designers, and I was adequate, but I wouldn't say that I was superbly talented. But the copywriting that we had to work with, I thought for the most part was abysmal. And did actually tell my boss that I thought the copywriting was appalling. And of course he said, well, do you think you can do any better? And I promptly did, and I realised that I was in the wrong business. So I wrote, because I came to Norwich over 30 years ago to run the City Council's events, and I was an event manager, and then I wrote 3 books about how to put on events, which did well, and one of them still in print to this day. That was in 1991 or something. And is anybody around who can remember the New Writing Partnership in Norwich? So you know the National Centre for Writing, which was the Norwich Writers' Centre to begin with. Actually, before that, it had another iteration which was called the New Writing Partnership. And when that started, and I can't really remember exactly, it was around the new millennium, I thought, I'm not going to do a degree, but I want to go to this. And that's when I began to discover other writers that lived in Norwich. And they used to put on lots of really good workshops, very, very good seminars with published writers, with, you know, Costa Prize winners, some really good heavyweight writers that like they do now, really. And yeah, so I started writing creatively at that point. And it was just trial and error, really. And I was lucky enough to win a short story prize in 1996. And that kind of just kept me boosted a bit, because I didn't do very well after that for a while. But, and then my father died in 2003. And my mum gave me a box of letters, over 200 letters. And she said someone should write his story. And I kind of always knew that I had to write about polio and about my father at some point. And just to tell you that I don't know whether anybody, Phillida, I don't know, did you buy the book?
Yeah, I did, and I read it, and it's totally moving. And I just felt for you and your family. You know, not ever having been through anything as dramatic as that. How hard for you to see someone you love in that position. But yeah, beautifully written. Beautiful.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I think, you know, when you start to write something about your own life or people that you know, I mean, goodness me, it really brings up a lot of stuff that you have to deal with as well. And my father, very briefly, he'd been training for the Olympics, and he got married to my mum, and they'd only been married 6 weeks actually, and then he caught polio. And then he was in hospital, in and out of hospital for 6 years. And I just think that for my mother, you know, brand new wife, they barely knew each other really. It must have been absolutely appalling. And they didn't ever talk about those years. I was born in 1958 and my brother in 1960. And I had all these letters. I had my memories from when I was a child. And then I had a sort of detective story from now, looking back at everything, and lots of interviews to do with people, to do before people died, actually. And my problem was structure. You know, I knew the story inside out. And the thing is, when you know your own story, you can write forever, can't you? Because you know everything, and everything it seems to be interesting, but of course it's not. And it isn't always to do with the story. And these letters that I had, they kind of they informed me what had happened in those missing years. And so I am very interested in the way people use letters, and not just letters, but logs and diaries and all sorts of things. You know, that it's never gone out of fashion. There's always been books that people have written that have used logs and the epistolary story, which is what it's known as. And in fact, if you go right back to Bram Stoker's Dracula, I mean, that uses newspaper cuttings and has, you know, I don't know when anybody's ever read that actually in its original form, but you'll know that it's all a ship's log, and it's newspaper cuttings, and it's all sorts of amazing things. And if you go back to childhood, or perhaps you read The Jolly Postman to your children, I mean, that's all in letters. And it progresses a story in wonderful ways. And so I decided to use the letters and 3 threads. And I don't use the letters exclusively, but I take bits from it, and every now and then, I don't know whether you can see that, you know, I use a whole letter, because I think there's nothing better to explain what I want to say than the words of the person who wrote that letter themselves, and especially my father, who isn't alive now, but I can use his words. So my challenge to you for your annual short story competition is very simple, but it is all about structure, because I think that structure gets a bit lost in the short story in an effort to flesh out the characters within a short space, and then to get a satisfying resolve, or at least something for the reader to keep thinking about. But actually what we do when we tell an anecdote, or when we write a successful short story, we're writing a story arc. We're not just writing a line, you know, like a bit of this that happened or a bit of that happened. It has to have a narrative arc, and you have to have some structure. And so this is what I want you to do. I want you to write an epistolary short story featuring a strong female lead in 2,000 words maximum. And that is it. It can be in the form of diary entries, letters, logs, newspaper cuttings, or a mixture. But I want the form to be strictly adhered to and paramount to the narrative. What do you think?
Just writing it down.
And there's some really good short stories on the internet that are in the epistolary form. And one of them, I know you can find it on the internet if you want to familiarise yourself with something. It's called The Last Thing We Need. And it's by Claire Vaye, which is V-A-Y-E, Watkins. And it can actually, if you want her whole collection, that collection, it's a magnificent collection, and it's called Battleborn. I think she might be Australian, or certainly American, but one or the other. And this is a really fabulous short story that is just done in letters from just one side of a correspondence, and it is terrific. So does anybody want to ask me any questions about that?
I have one question that was asked actually from somebody on our social media.
Yes.
Although I'm sure that you've actually answered this already, but they've asked if it has to all be epistolary, or if they can break some of it up with some prose, or do you want it all to be sort of letters and so on?
No, I'm not going to be so prescriptive, but I want the letters to inform the whole story. So, you know, you haven't got a story that you could write there without the letters. Do you see what I mean?
No, I see exactly what you mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask, can the letters take the form of an electronic? So, like, could it be blogs or social posts or whatever? But
yeah, they could be texts. You know, I'm not going to say they even have to be letters. You know, they can be diary entries. They could be a log for something, or I mean, I think I have seen a short story all done in texts, which is kind of interesting. But the great thing is that I think it gives there's an ease in reading short contained chunks, whether they're reports or diary entries or a one-sided correspondence. But I think that it allows the reader to fill in the gaps, which is very satisfying. And you could say what you were talking about, Ian, about taking one of your short stories and turning it into a play. it wouldn't be so very far from doing that if you wanted to, by using this form. So by using,
is it always one-sided?
Sorry?
Is it always one-sided?
No, it doesn't have to be one-sided, but it often is.
Okay. And does it have to be is it a factual thing, or
No, absolutely not. No. It just has to be a very, a satisfying short story.
I find the prospect of writing diary entries quite interesting. I wrote a diary myself from the age of about 11 all the way up to 23 odd. So it's a really interesting thing for me to look back on. Not that I'm going to use it, because most of it's pretty dreadful. But yeah, I do like. I find diary entries really interesting. So you get to know the real person, don't you? Actually, in their thoughts and.
I mean, it's a brilliant way to do fiction as well. I mean, you think of Bridget Jones's diary. I mean, that's the entire book is done like that. Or Daddy Longlegs. I mean, there was an incredible novella that was done like that. And it stops and starts, but you fill in the gaps. When the next entry starts, you think, oh, that's happened in between. So I hope you agree that it's going to be a wide enough to allow a whole variety of subject matters, but tight enough and perhaps unusual enough to present a real challenge, as well as an opportunity to perhaps try something new.
And sorry, can it be any genre at all?
I think so. I'm not going to put it. I mean, it just has to be an epistolary short story, and I know that your requirement is to feature a strong female lead.
Mm-hmm.
And you can play around, can't you, with unreliable narrator, for instance, or somebody who isn't the strong female lead, that sort of highlights something that's going on, or yeah, all sorts of things. I mean, I'm not going to start, otherwise I won't start imagining other things for you, but I think you could have but I would make yourself familiar with the form before you start.
Sarah, how do you define a strong female character? What's the definition of strong in this instance?
Well, isn't that what your requirement for the Ivy Ferrari Cup is about?
Yes, but it's just a question of how you would interpret.
Oh, well, I think we all know what a strong female is, and I want to see how. Well, I think my mother, Phillida, would you say that my mother was pretty strong in this?
20 hours.
Yeah, I've been living in the 19th century for a while, so it's hard to completely remember that particular angle on it. But she'd have to have been, surely.
I mean, she was only 23.
Yeah, she couldn't go under, could she?
No, and she's 91 now and still going strong.
Wow.
And she still plays tennis, and she still plays bridge, and she still entertains all the time.
Wow.
And she is she is bloomin' annoying, is my mother. She's very hard to deal with. But I think that's what kind of pulled her through. She's also an eternal optimist. I think, she continues to see people all during lockdown. She and her friends saw each other. I think they were just in total optimistic denial, frankly. She's, so you can interpret strong however you like. I mean, how did Ivy Ferrari interpret strong?
That's a very good question. Yeah.
I think the fact that she wrote mainly romantic fiction led us to want a female protagonist in that competition, wasn't it? That was, although Ivy wrote lots of stuff, she mainly did romantic fiction. And as such, it was, it was back in the dark ages before my time when that was decided, but I can only imagine that was the case.
Yeah.
And it's something we do every other
Oh,
year.
right.
And then in the intermediate year, you've got the strong male character.
Oh, okay.
A different trophy.
So I want to just describe something which you can, so that it doesn't have to be from the point of view of the person who you would call the protagonist or the protagonist.
Okay.
Because if you take
sorry, can I just interject? The Ivy Ferrari was originally for romantic fiction.
It was actually, wasn't it, Jill? Yeah, you're right.
We changed it as a committee a few years ago on the basis that we ought to move with the times, as the other competition was for a strong male protagonist, and we changed it to strong female, away from being exclusively romantic fiction. Of course, that didn't preclude strong female characters in the romantic fiction. There were plenty, but it opened up the competition and made it more progressive and up to date.
Yes, that allows people to experiment, doesn't it, with different genres, which is, you know, you learn a lot and you can decide where you want to, where your strengths lie by doing that. And, you know, I always use The Great Gatsby as an example about, I think Nick is the person who writes it, who we get it from his point of view. But it is clearly all about Gatsby, isn't it? It's about the way he sees Gatsby and how Gatsby behaves and Gatsby's motivations and Gatsby to do with Daisy and so on. And so you can really play around with where this protagonist is, you know, from whose point of view, their own or somebody else looking at them.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I'd like to just ask a question about Push and how it came together, rather than about competition. Yeah. I'm fascinated by you say you were given this pile of letters.
Yes.
Were they mainly one-sided? Was it just a pile from one person to another, or did you get the replies as well?
I've got no replies. But initially, it was all my father had kept all my mother's letters. To begin with, there were no letters from my dad because he was paralysed.
Oh, right.
And he couldn't write. And that was all part of the physiotherapy that he had to go through to learn to. He was paralysed neck downwards initially. But fortunately not his parasympathetic nerves, so he was still able to breathe and the heart worked and so on, which, you know, that's why people, if they get bulbic, or I think it's called polio, then all those parts go and you die. But or you have to go into an iron lung. But Dad never did go in the iron lung. It was in the same room as him for quite a long time. I think they thought he would be ready to go in there, but he never actually was in an iron lung, thank goodness. But yes, he did have to learn to write again. And to begin with, when he was in the isolation hospital, my mum would go and look at him through the window. He was on a ground floor, and that's all. She wasn't allowed to go and talk to him or anything. She just looked at him through the window. But anyway, yes, I had these letters, and then my mum kept finding more, and then I found a fantastic bunch of my father's letters in his handwriting. Because the hospital-acquired infection in those days was not MRSA, it was TB, and my dad caught TB while he was in the polio hospital, which was pretty horrendous. And then he would have come out of hospital, but he then went, that was what kept him in hospital for such a long time, was the TB. And and then finally at the end of it all, he had a gigantic operation to remove his tuberculoid lung because it kept breaking out again. And then after that, he took himself off as a volunteer to Stoke Mandeville. And I've got some incredible letters from Stoke Mandeville that he wrote to my mum. But I have no replies. You know, it's either one side or the other.
And that's the issue I've got. When my mummy died about 6 years ago, I picked up a lot of letters from my father to her. They travelled a bit with his family, but nothing from her back, because they all went with him when they divorced. And also a schoolgirl diary. And at some point, in the near future, when I finish this next project, I'd like to perhaps do one of Jill's courses again and learn how to write my own family memoir using these letters. And frankly, teenage girls don't change at all, I'll be honest. It was all the same stuff, even though it was wartime, or just after the war, all the same stuff as we used to worry about as young.
Don't you think that's the same when you look at those amazing wax tablets that were sent from Hadrian's Wall by the Romans? They've got some of those, and they're still the things that exercise people. You know, I haven't got enough warm socks. Can you make me a vest, please? The food here is terrible. The girls look like the back end of a bus, and I wish I had a girlfriend. You know, I mean, it's just hilarious. And you can't believe that they were written, you know, 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Especially about the bus.
Amazing.
Did you want me to read something out of the book?
Yeah.
Can I interject? Sorry. About, you said about the Jolly Postman, which is an amazing. I forgot all about that book. So with the 2,000 word limit, can we include things like photos or images or sketches or certificates and stuff like that? Could you build things that aren't necessarily text into it?
I think it's got. I am going to be prescriptive here, because I think that if you want to work on something with a view to getting published, there are places that will publish photos and extra bits, but it's much easier if it's just text.
Cool.
So I think for this exercise, I would stick to just text, but that's nothing stopping you describing something.
Yep, cool. Thank you.
And yes, Ian, we would like her to read, wouldn't we?
Yes, we would. We're very much. Sarah, could you read something then, please?
Okay, so I've got a chapter here. I've got about sort of 8 or 9 minutes to read. Is that too long, or is that okay?
Well, that's fine by me. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to actually read something that is quite late on in the book, because as I explained, I ended up writing this book with these 3 threads. In a way, you could say it was before I was born, and sort of my childhood, which I did in the first person present to give it really that strong sort of right in there, in media res kind of feel about it, and then now looking back on things. So it was before, then, and now, if you like. And this little bit that I'm going to read has all those 3 threads, and it's got a whole letter in it as well. And I want to just show you something. When I do a talk normally, I opened this up, and this, you see this, we've all been looking at coronaviruses, haven't we, on the telly? Mm-hmm. And this is a polio virus. And this horrible little thing is what did for my dad. And at John Innes, they are designing an incredible new vaccine through plant material that is identical. They have genetically modified it to be identical to the polio virus, this thing here. It's made from a tobacco plant. And in the end, they're going to be able to just make a kind of smoothie of it, and we're going to drink it. And it won't do us any harm, and you can't catch it, but the body will recognise that, which will be made from tobacco plant, a non-smoking tobacco plant, and that will be the new generation vaccines. And it can be powdered and put in boxes, and it will live in an ambient temperature for years, and people can go off into the wilds and the Congo, up hills, whatever. It hasn't got to be refrigerated. It doesn't have a shelf life. I just want to say about George Lomonosov, who has designed this, it's absolutely brilliant.
That's fascinating. And it begs the obvious question, can they do the same for corona, doesn't it?
Sorry, Ian, you've gone very quiet. I can't hear.
Well, it begs the question whether they can do the same for corona.
Well, I think ultimately they will be able to, but at the moment they've got to the point of being able to make this thing at you know, in huge amounts, but they haven't tested it. They haven't gone through the human testing yet. And they've got to make sure that the humans really do, you know, that our bodies recognise it as such and form a proper immune response. But, right, so, I found the bundle of letters from my father, and it's August, it's present. I'm starting from the now bit. This was the first time I'd read of my father's fears and anxieties in his own words, or seen the hospital wards through his eyes. He was loving, reassuring, anxious, and most certainly, almost certainly, still censoring information to protect my mother. He was only 26 at the time, I might add, but he felt huge responsibility for her. Old habits die hard, even when promises have been requested and granted. Unlike my mother, who filled her letters with how she occupied her days, addenda to previous conversations face-to-face in the ward and energetic encouragement, my father described his state of mind and his cautious approach to the next set of treatments, but rarely the future, except in the most general terms. And in every letter, he recorded what he could see from the window. I looked at the windows, but they were rather steamed up. Or, it was very foggy out and I worried about your journey. Or, trying to write lying down and only seeing the tops of the trees from this position. Or, it's been a glorious day and I hope it's been the same in Norfolk. My mother was living with my grandparents who lived at Thelverton, and that's where my father was brought up. My father's preoccupation with the weather was easy to understand. From those first few weeks lying flat in a room at Uxbridge looking at the manicured gardens, or from Hanbury Ward on the top floor of the London Hospital for nearly 6 months with nothing but sky to see. Then on his back again, often all alone during the days in Man Ward at the Annex in Brentwood. For years on end, with little to look at except through rectangles of glass, he must have seized on any change in his surroundings. For a man who'd spent so much time on the river rowing in all conditions, incarceration indoors was particularly difficult to endure. Even when the hospital days were long behind him, poor weather put a halt to most outdoor activities. He couldn't slip on a pair of Wellington boots and fling a raincoat over his shoulders before running outside like the rest of us. So when we were children, it became routine for us all to look at the forecast before any outing. And while out, we'd continually monitor the sky for imminent changes. My father's lap presented a large area to the rain. His twill trousers and comfortable suede hush-puppy ankle boots would soon soak through, and his chair was not improved by exposure to water. Macs and umbrellas were kept in the car just in case. We became adept at looking for shelter if the clouds seemed threatening. He rarely complained, but we became attuned to the risks of my father getting wet or chilled. The London Hospital Annex, 1956. Alexander Ward, Sunday the 9th of December. My darling Didi, my mother's name was Diana and he always called her Didi. And this is, sorry, I just need to set the scene a little bit. He had been out of hospital for the summer, but he'd gone to have a wisdom tooth taken out and he had the most terrible reaction to it and chills and terrible temperatures, and they discovered that actually the TB had broken out in his lung again, and so he was taken straight back to the TB annex, and he didn't really, to have streptomycin they had to do streptomycin antibiotic shots every morning and evening, and because his legs weren't big enough, he had them in each arm morning and evening, and they'd become completely ulcerated all the way down. And until he had got what they called cover with that, they couldn't operate if they were going to do that, to take his lung out. My darling Didi, although it is a bare 24 hours since we arrived here, it seems a great deal longer. I miss you very much indeed and think about you all a great deal. Don't think that I'm miserable. I'm not, but it takes time to make friends and settle down into a routine that makes the time pass more quickly. I can't tell you anything about future prospects yet, and we shall have to wait for a fortnight or 3 weeks, I expect, until Russ, that was his doctor, can get an idea of how things are shaping and make plans accordingly. Anyway, keep your chin up and let us pray that it won't be too long before we're together again. This ward seems to have a cat of its own, a sleek black job called Banjo. I must admit that I didn't get much sleep last night. Inevitable, I suppose, in a new place with light and noises to contend with. Added to which my mind seemed full of thoughts, chasing each other round and round. However, the tedium was considerably relieved when the aforesaid Banjo cornered and killed a mouse under somebody's bed. It was absolute bedlam for a few minutes, and I just couldn't think what was going on. What sort of a journey back did you have last night? I looked out of the windows once or twice to try and see if it was foggy, but they were rather steamed up, and I didn't learn much. The one time I could have done with the windows open, and they decide for once that it is too cold. I think that we have a decent lot of nurses on the ward, as far as I can tell in such a short time, and I don't think the patients are living up to the unsavoury traditions that Alex Ward used to have. I think that I'd better stop now, because there really isn't anything to say except that I love you very, very much and miss you terribly. God bless you all, my love to Pa, Ma and Mrs. B, with a very special stack of love to you, honey. Push. Home, Suffolk, 1965. I'm not good at sleeping, but I don't mind getting up in the mornings. Usually I pull on my clothes and run downstairs, but if I'm too slow before Daddy goes to the bathroom, I'm stuck in my room waiting. Mummy checks the landing before Daddy goes for a wash. She pokes her head around our doors and warns us to stay in our bedrooms. Once I forgot and came out too early. Daddy doesn't really like to be seen doing his morning rituals. It takes him a very long time to get ready. He wakes up. I can hear his grumbles and coughs through the wall. Then he switches on the wireless. He likes to listen to the home service. He's full of aches and pains, and Mummy massages him every day to help his muscles. He wears special night shirts that she makes for him because he doesn't like pyjama bottoms that wrinkle up under him in the night. It hurts him a lot and makes sore places. Our parents have 2 beds that are pushed together. They have shiny eiderdowns which are dark pink, with pretty pink, green and white flowery frilly bits around the bed. They match the curtains and the blocked-in fireplace behind their heads, which has wallpaper to look like a headboard. Daddy can't bear any weight on his legs, so his covers go over the cradle at the bottom of his bed. Thom, our cat, likes to sit there, sinking between the square metal bits like a grumpy old man slumped in a hammock and purring. Sometimes, on his birthday or Christmas Day when Daddy has a lie-in, Will and I might go in and see him in bed, and he pretends to be a mad person locked away in the attic and tells us a story which has us laughing and scared all at the same time. On those mornings we stand close to the bed, but not touching it. We mustn't bump his bed or his chair. But most days he wakes up, Mummy rubs his legs, and then he does, well, I don't know, whatever it is that he does before getting into his chair while Mummy is downstairs letting James, our dog, out for a run, opening all the shutters and getting in the post and the papers. The time I saw him on the landing, he was almost bare, except a towel across his lap. He balances the Roberts radio there so he doesn't miss the weather forecast. I've seen him with his back to me, emptying his night bottle down the lavatory. The back of the little chair is a muddy colour, sort of like Grandpa's shooting bag, and the canvas digs into his back, which is all slumped and rounded. He's sat so long in a chair that he has something called scoliosis of the spine, which just means that it's crooked like the giant capital S at the beginning of my name. On his shoulder, all the way down to his waist, is a reddish coloured scar in a big curve. He had lots and lots of stitches. I know that it was 26 on the outside and 30 on the inside, which is 56 in all. They took a piece of lung out when his TB refused to get better. He's not told us much about being in hospital, but I asked him about his scar when I saw it by accident on the beach in Cornwall. He told me what it was, but his voice made me shiver, and I shouldn't have mentioned it, and I know I must never, ever talk of it again. We hardly ever see his legs, except perhaps a tiny bit peeping out above his socks if his trousers have got hooked up. They're very thin and look a bit like sticks, but his skin doesn't really look like skin. It's more like silvery tissue paper. A few days ago, when we went out to lunch, we were all playing with some kittens when two ran up the flapping open bit of his trousers. I think they thought his legs were tree trunks. One kitten went up each leg. He said it felt like having needles driven into his flesh. He had to roll up his trousers and show his legs so someone could unhook the kittens. I think his watery eyes were as much to do with that as for the pain and the blood. When we got home, he said he was really worried about getting ulcers, and he asked me to stroke Germline very gently all over the bad places because Mummy had to rush out to a meeting. I had to do it again today, but you can still see scratches and punctures as though someone had gone a bit mad with a red biro all over his white skin. So there you can see the three threads in completely different time frames, but I hope you see that how it's built the narrative. And we know now that he did have his lung taken out because of what I saw on the beach. And so I've done the book all the way through like that. And basically, it's just a whole collection of short stories.
You certainly captured the child's voice at that point.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and that's not easy to sustain. Having tried probably badly in the past. We've got Maureen online tonight, who's one of our children's writers. And yeah, she'll know about voices and that sort of thing. And yeah, I liked that switch. And do you use more of that? I can't remember. Forgive me.
I do. Yes. I mean, that happens all the way through that switch backwards and forwards all the time, from time frame to time frame. But it somehow it progresses the narrative on, even though it's looking back, it's before, it's the letters, it's the childhood bit. But I think it shows how little we knew as children.
Yes.
Just tiny little bits here and there, and how little we were allowed to talk about it. Yeah. Maureen, if you write for children, God, that is so hard. Do you know, it really annoys me. When I first started writing, I don't know whether anybody else has experienced this. People would say to me, when I just said I'd started writing shorts, "Oh, do you write children's stuff?" And I always used to respond, "No, I'm not nearly a good enough writer for that."
Yeah.
Because people who don't write assume that the entry level is to write for children. And it so isn't.
No, because you have to get what you want to say in such a smaller space, because children's books are so much thinner.
Yes.
So you've got to use your words really carefully.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you've got to get the pitch exactly right for the age group and so on, haven't you?
You have.
Yeah. So I have huge admiration for you doing that.
And you have to be careful you don't. I mean, I started writing a book years ago, and then I gave up halfway through, and then sort of 10 years later I got it out to look at it again, and she'd got a Walkman, whereas now so you have to be careful that you don't do things that'll get dated.
Yeah.
Especially with the youngsters, because they won't know what you're talking about. What's a Walkman?
Yeah, unless you want it set back in whatever, which is rather nice. Yeah.
But then you'd have to explain what a Walkman is.
Well, you would. But it's interesting because, you know, you say that you wrote the thing before that when Walkman, but, you know, it can take us so long. This book, although I wrote lots of other things in between, I started this book in 2004. And then I actually got an agent in 2009. And then I sacked her again in 2016 because she was absolutely hopeless. She just made me feel really, really terrible. And after that, I did okay. But it it took me so long to get it to a book that could be published. And I think it's worth going back and looking at things over and over again. You know, it might not be right for the time. And yeah.
And your style will have changed over those years. Presumably, you'd have found that your earlier work you maybe could adapt and improve on, because practice makes perfect.
I definitely was too verbose. And I think it took eventually my wonderful editor, Sam Ruddock, who was brutal, absolutely brutal with he was so sweet, but he was brutal. And originally my book was, oh gosh, how long was it? 190 something thousand words. Yeah. I mean, I took out whole chunks, whole people, whole this, that, and the other. And he got it down to 95,000 words. So I actually cut nearly 100,000 words, over half of it. And that was painful. It did it over several months. Yeah.
So the picture book has to be about 500.
Yeah, yeah.
So did you, was he produced by the publishers, or did you actually hire him independently?
No, Sam Ruddock is one of the Gatehouse editors. Yeah, yeah. And he also does Story Machine Productions. So he liked the book so much as the editor that we then made a production of it, which you can see a trailer on my website, and we're probably we've been trying to sell it to festival. Well, it started to go around the festivals, but of course all those have had to be postponed and cancelled. And so we are thinking of putting together an online version of it, which you know would be quite exciting to do, I think.
Absolutely.
I look forward to that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was good to do.
Yep. Has anyone any other questions?
Either about this or about the competition.
No, I've got another question. It's a very rude question, Sarah, but
I might not answer it.
Two versions of Chambers Dictionary. Are they both the same book, or are they different?
No, one's the dictionary and one's the thesaurus.
Oh, that's okay. Yes. No, the trouble is, I've been dying to ask that question.
Oh no, that's fine. The thing is, do you know, I kind of use the internet quite a bit when I'm trying to look things up. But when I go back to those books, I always get what I want. They're absolutely fantastic. Yeah. They were a present one Christmas from my husband, and I couldn't believe this hugely heavy present on my lap, and I could not have been more thrilled. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Anyway, sir, thank you very much. I think everyone knows what the brief is. The deadline for the entries is the 3rd of November. And I believe we'll be welcoming Sarah back on the 19th of January. Who knows whether it will be again via Zoom, or hopefully Boris will have produced some miracle drug and we'll all be back in the Chantry Hall, which would be wonderful.
Shall we put bets down for that?
I have a horrible suspicion which one it's going to be, but I'll be pleasantly surprised if I'm wrong.
Well, it would be lovely to meet you all in person, but if it has to be Zoom again, then that will be fine. And I really look forward to reading your entries. I look forward to that very much. And if I can just, because I was going to be able to offer for sale the book, and I did promise Sam I would say this. So if you want to buy the book, it is now much cheaper than it was as a hardback, but you can buy it as an ebook. And if you go to my website, you can find the links through to Gatehouse, and I hope you would enjoy it if you read it. Thank you very, very much for inviting me, and I feel quite very honoured to set and to judge your competition. Thank you, Phillida, very much for asking me. And yeah, it's been. I'll look forward very much to reading all your entries.